What's up, everybody? We're back with another fantasy football video. Week 4, buy low, sell high, waivers and drops. That's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to go over players that I like that you can trade for, players that I recommend trading away, as well as waiver wire guys to consider for the upcoming week. So we've got a couple weeks under our belt so far, so we've got some trends that we're starting to notice. So I'm going to walk you through in this video what I would do as a pure fantasy football owner to help you guys be successful in fantasy football. If you're interested in more content like this, please check out my channel. I make a wide variety of videos, fantasy football, as well as some other stuff too if you're interested. So we'll start. I first just want to cover the Chicago Bears and my strategy with them, because a lot of people have a wide variety of questions in terms of what to do with their players, especially the way their offenses look so far. A lot of guys drafted David Montgomery high. They're concerned what to do with him. Justin Fields was incredibly disappointing in week 3 in his first NFL start. Receivers, because of the way Justin Fields played, did not have a good game. So for me personally, what I'm doing is I'm holding all the Bears right now. I'm not dropping any of these guys. I'm not trying to sell any of these guys at this time because they have Detroit next week. I do think that Cleveland's defense is for real. They look like one of the best defenses in the NFL. So for me personally, I'm going to be waiting on the Bears. I'm not sure if I feel comfortable starting any of them in week 4. I'll talk more about that in my start sit video coming out this Saturday. But they're still good assets to hold at this time because Justin Fields does have potential as a running quarterback and as a guy who can expand the playbook. He possibly just didn't have the time to do that. So we'll see how he develops moving forward. But personally, I'm holding all the Bears. I may be putting in a buy low offer on David Montgomery, considering a lot of people are probably very down on him now in the amount of volume that he's getting in that backfield. But that's my general take on the Bears, because I'm sure there would be a lot of questions about that as a fantasy football owner. So we're going to talk buy low players first. I'm going to go through every position for buy low, and then I'll talk sell high every position, waivers, and drops, kind of like in my previous video. If you want to see last week's video, I've got it in the description below. So we'll start at buy low quarterbacks. And the first 2 quarterbacks I'm going to kind of lump here together, and it's Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. Both of these guys have started out relatively mediocre. Aaron Rodgers had a very poor week 1, went off week 2, and then week 3 was kind of just meh. Russell Wilson had a good week 1, and then the last 2 weeks he's kind of been relatively mediocre. And these are players that have upside to be top 5 performing quarterbacks. So at this time, what I would personally recommend is to try to put in some offers and see what you can get for them, because they're going to most likely improve as the season goes on. So see what offers you can get out there for them, but it's probably going to be a pretty steep price considering the name brand that those guys have. Another guy to consider buying low on as well is Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence has not played well so far this season. He only put up about 7 fantasy points on Sunday, but he is a good opportunity guy to buy low on if you have a position to bench a quarterback for the time being, let him develop. Trevor Lawrence, what I like about him so far is that even though he is making mistakes, he's showing the aggressiveness and presence in the pocket, which shows that he is adapting to the NFL. Obviously, he needs to improve his decision making, but this team has some very favorable matchups coming up down the road that will likely have Trevor Lawrence have a better second stretch of the season as opposed to the first half. So if you're willing to wait on him, you might be able to get a pretty decent. You might be able to afford him for a pretty decent price relative to what you could at the beginning of the season, and he could turn some good value in for you at the end of the season. So it's definitely something to consider as well. Another guy I would consider buying low on too is Jalen Hurts. This video is being recorded at the time of the Dallas-Philadelphia game, and Jalen Hurts has started off relatively poorly in this game. But Jalen Hurts gets the Kansas City Chiefs next week, and he will have the opportunity to put up some points against them. He not only provides a good rushing floor value, but Kansas City's defense has been questionable at times. I like him to potentially be a bounce-back candidate that you can buy low on. He still has a lot of value just because of his ability to run the ball. Hasn't really had a great game so far either. So he's somebody that you can try to buy low on. Maybe week 1 you consider a great game, but I think that there's a chance that he really goes off against a poor defense and is a top 5 fantasy producer for that week. Buy low candidates. So my number 1 buy low running back is Nick Chubb. I talked about this in my video yesterday, but Nick Chubb had 22 carries for 84 yards against the Bears. Didn't get a touchdown. Kareem Hunt kind of overshadowed him in that regards. But Nick Chubb is the running back in this backfield. He's the guy that's getting all the carries. And when you have volume like that, eventually it's going to translate into points down the road. They're going to have some more favorable matchups. Chicago is a pretty tough defense. He doesn't really provide the PPR value that you would like, but this team is going to get Detroit twice as the season goes along. They've also got Pittsburgh, which is not as intimidating as they've been in the past. Arizona coming up on the schedule. Las Vegas, Green Bay. Other teams that are relatively mediocre to poor defenses as well. So you can consider Nick Chubb as a buy low candidate, especially after a game that's relatively disappointing. Try to see what you can get for him now before he goes off. Other guys to consider as well. Myles Gaskin is probably the next biggest name on this list that I would say. Myles Gaskin has struggled this season, had a lot of hype and expectations going into the offseason relative to a small sample size last year, but he is proving to be the preferred back in this backfield. He is getting the majority of the carries. He also provides PPR value as a pass-catching running back as well. And for next week, Miami's has a much easier matchup. So Miami next week gets the Indianapolis Colts, which just got carved up by Derrick Henry. So he does provide some value there. And if Jacoby Brissett has a difficult time against the Colts, he could be dumping it off to him as well. So I like Myles Gaskin as somebody that you can buy low on and potentially give you some value because he looks to be the preferred back in this backfield. Other running backs to consider as well. Tyson Williams struggled in week 2, but he is still the most efficient, week 3, this past Sunday. But he is the most efficient of these Baltimore running backs by far relative to Latavius Murray and Devonta Freeman. So I still like Tyson Williams as somebody you can buy. I think this was just a very weird game in which the Ravens struggled to get anything going, especially after a 2-point performance. This is a good opportunity to buy low. And then some other running backs that are kind of on the fringe to consider buying low, but I don't necessarily like long-term, but more just temporary guys that you can trade for now and then try to flip away later. First one, Sony Michel. So Sony Michel has a lot of volume in the Rams backfield. Had Tampa Bay this week, so you're not really going to get a lot of opportunity there, but 20 carries against the Bucs. And then next week, the Rams have the Arizona Cardinals. And Arizona, as we just saw, gave up a lot of points to James Robinson. He was number 3 running back on the week. So Sony Michel could return some good value for you if you buy low. Other guys to consider as well. Ronald Jones is somebody that you're more just going to stash if there's any kind of injury in the backfield that frees up carries from Leonard Fournette. But Ronald Jones got more carries than Fournette did this past week, and he still has some value that when healthy, he could be a productive running back. He's got a couple guys competing against, though, but a lot of people are very low on Ronald Jones right now, and a lot of people are dropping him. So you could put in a pretty decent offer for him and probably be able to acquire Ronald Jones if you have an extra spot that you're willing to be patient to let him develop. So now we will move to wide receivers. So first, I just want to talk 2 guys that you want to try to put offers for. It's going to be tough, but you might be able to. DeAndre Hopkins and Stefon Diggs. Hopkins has been nursing an injury and had mediocre games the past 2 weeks. Didn't play very well in week 3. Stefon Diggs has also not really gone off yet. These are 2 guys that are elite receivers that you can put in cheaper offers for relative to what you would usually have to pay, and you might be able to acquire them. It's worth it, in my opinion, if you can get somebody like Hopkins on your team. Another guy that I would definitely consider buying low on, and I talked about him yesterday, is Julio Jones. I talked about A.J. Brown as my top wide receiver to pick up in week 3, and I'd still believe all those things except he got injured. So, tough break for A.J. Brown, but now this applies to Julio Jones as somebody who can benefit from some very favorable matchups that Tennessee has, notably against the Jets and the Jags the next 2 weeks. And it was a weird week for the Titans where multiple players caught touchdowns that were not involved, like Jeremy McNichols. They also had Nick Westbrook-Ikine, I believe that's how you say his name. He was another guy that caught a touchdown. So a very weird week for the Titans, and I believe that Julio Jones is still the preferred option, and he will have a lot of opportunity for them moving forward too. So another guy to buy low on is Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley has been up and down this season and has concerned a lot of people that own him. But next week he gets the Washington football team, which just gave up a lot of yards to the Buffalo Bills. And I imagine that this game is going to be a shootout unless Washington can suddenly correct a defense that has been very disappointing this season. And Calvin Ridley is still the number 1 receiver for Atlanta. So if you could buy low on Calvin Ridley, I would definitely see what I can do there as well. And then some other guys to consider too. Michael Pittman, still the preferred option in Indianapolis. Obviously the quarterback play kind of hurts his ceiling to a degree, but he's going to have some opportunities as Wentz supposedly gets healthier and develops some more rapport because he is the best receiver on that team. He's getting a large target share relative to the other guys. Jalen Waddle is another guy to consider buying low. As I talked about in yesterday's video, 14 targets, 12 receptions in week 3, leading the wide receiver core. We thought it could have been Will Fuller or even Devontae Parker, but it looks like it's Waddle. He's got a lot of upside. I would definitely try to see what you can do in terms of getting him. And then last receiver, again, going to be tough, but Terry McLaurin coming off a down week against Buffalo. I think he will have a lot more opportunity against Atlanta. And just in general moving forward in the future because he's Washington's best receiver by far. So try to take advantage of a down week for him. Buy low tight ends. So last week I told you to buy low on George Kittle, and if you did, you reap the benefits of that. Just as an aside, by the way, I forgot to mention this earlier, but if you go back to my week 3 video, I talked about how the top 2 quarterbacks to buy low on were Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, and sure enough, they were the number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks that week. So not to brag, but I was kind of right there. So yeah. But anyway, we'll go back to tight ends. And the guy I think you should buy low on is TJ Hockenson. Very weird. That whole game was just very weird to me in terms of player stats. I kind of think it was a little more of a fluke for both teams in general. But Hockenson only had 2 receptions for 10 yards. I do not think that will be a consistent trend moving forward. And if somebody is panicking on him and willing to sell him, I'm not entirely sure why they would be, but see what you can get. Maybe you could trade Gronkowski away for Hockenson, and I think that would be very smart. I also told you to sell Gronk too, and that I think worked out as well. So sometimes I am right, even though sometimes I also make mistakes too. But that's kind of true with everybody. Other guys to buy low on, Darren Waller had a rough past 2 weeks, but he still is one of the preferred options from Derek Carr. See what kind of low ball offers you can get for him. And then Noah Fant. A weird game because Denver didn't need to throw because they were up by so much the whole game. So Fant will get more involvement moving forward, especially since they play the Ravens next week. Defenses to buy low on. I like the Rams as a buy low defense. They have a tough matchup against Arizona. They also didn't put up any. They put up a 0 against Tampa Bay. But after they play Arizona, they've just got some great matchups coming up. Seattle offense is kind of iffy right now. We'll see how that develops. But then 3 just goldmine opportunities for an elite defense against the Giants, the Lions, and the Texans in consecutive weeks. So try to see if you can get ahead of your managers and acquire the defense earlier, because that's getting closer to the buy range where you're going to have a lot of players that you would have started that are going to be out. If you could buy low on the Rams defense and start them from that week, let's see, that'll be week 6 to 8, then they can make up a lot of the points from your starters that would be on the bench. And then sell high. So I never buy low on a kicker, as you haven't realized that already. But sell high. So quarterbacks I would sell high on: Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is currently the number 4 quarterback in fantasy football. And he has been impressive, and I think that the system sets him up to be successful, and I do respect him for that. I think he's very underrated, but I don't think it is sustainable. They've had some relatively favorable defense the past few weeks, but then next week they get the Cleveland Browns, which just destroyed Justin Fields and any chance that that offense had of doing anything. So if you could flip Cousins for a quarterback like a Russell Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers, I would definitely try to do that if you can, because Cousins, if his offense is humming efficiently, he puts up great numbers, but when they are not, he can be have some very low games. And I think this could be an example game like that. So try to see what you can get for Cousins on the market. Other guys to sell high, I've already kind of talked about these two already, but see what you could still get from Tom Brady and Derek Carr. If you want to see more, check out my buy low, sell high video from last week where I talked about that in more depth. Running backs to sell high on. So I talked Nick Chubb. I'm going to talk the other Cleveland running back, Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt, you always kind of know that Hunt can have games like this, and I still think Hunt is excellent value for you to have as a RB2 flex player to throw in there. But if you're going to try to take advantage of Hunt's value, this is an excellent game to do that. He outperformed Nick Chubb, was one of the best running backs of the week last week. So what I would personally try to do is see what you can get for Kareem Hunt, because if you could get a guy from Kareem Hunt, as I talked about earlier, that's getting a large majority of the workload but not taking advantage of it. Like I mentioned, Antonio Gibson is somebody I would definitely consider getting from Kareem Hunt. Other guys include, Nick Chubb, as I mentioned. But basically running backs that have a larger volume that are on good offenses. Maybe Chris Carson is an example of that too. I would consider trading those type of players to my team and giving away Kareem Hunt. Other players to sell high on: James Conner had a great game against Jacksonville, but that was against Jacksonville, and he's also been highly inefficient the past 2 weeks before that. According to stats, I believe I saw that he was the most inefficient running back per touch the first 2 weeks of the season. So try to see what you can get for Conner. I don't think that game is going to be the norm moving forward. Other players to try to sell high on: Cordarelle Patterson. I've already talked about him a little bit, so I won't talk about it too much, but he's still performing very well. And if you can get guys that are going to have more consistent involvement, much like with Kareem Hunt, I would try to do that. And another player to sell high on, who's not exactly been high, but I think we kind of know he's not going to have a ceiling, is Kenyan Drake. We thought Kenyan Drake would be a guy that if Josh Jacobs went down, he could step up and be an every down back. That's not the case, and Peyton Barber, of all people, was the go-to back and put up the best game of his life, frankly. So Kenyan Drake is somebody that is going to be a change of pace back, but the way week 3 illustrated it to me is that he's not going to be a guy you can rely upon. So I would try to flip him for the value that he does have, because I think there's some better, cheaper options that you can get than trying to rely on Drake eventually breaking out as the change of pace option only. Wide receivers to sell high on. So I'm trying to sell Jamar Chase. That's my number 1 wide receiver to sell. And the reason I say this is because he's been highly dependent on touchdowns so far for his stats. So this is one of the things that you have to look at with receivers when you're trying to sell them, is the amount of touchdowns that they're getting in the first couple weeks of the season, if that's replicable, because there's going to be a regression as time goes on. So we look at Chase's numbers so far. He has 4 touchdowns on the season on 11 receptions. That's almost a touchdown every 3 receptions. Is that something that is that you can maintain the whole season? And the answer to that is no. T. Higgins is out currently. He's going to eventually come back. Joe Mixon is going to get his fair share of things as well. So for me personally, I would be trying to get rid of Jamar Chase, see what kind of value you can get for him on the trade market. Other guys to try to sell as well, and bear with me on this, but Mike Williams. He's playing great right now. He looks like he's the number 2 wide receiver on the season, but he's still ultimately is currently slotted as anywhere from the 1 to 3rd option on his team. So they could go Austin Eckler, they could go Keenan Allen, or they could go Mike Williams. It's pretty much those 3 guys. But if you can trade for somebody who I think will have more opportunity as a locked-in one, like a Devontae Adams, not sure if you can actually do that straight up, but maybe toss in a running back, and I'm saying to sell high on too. And like let's say Cordarelle Patterson or Kareem Hunt for, maybe not Kareem Hunt, but Cordarelle Patterson definitely. And Mike Williams for Devontae Adams, I would definitely do that deal. So just an example, Tyreek Hill is another one that I would do that I would make that trade for as well. Guys that are going to have more consistent involvement in the offense. Mike Williams does have a history of up and down performances, so keep that in mind. Other players to try to sell high on, OBJ, I just don't think that game is going to be indicative of how he'll play the whole season. And then AJ Green, same thing, had a great game, but Hopkins is injured, and Arizona, I think, is just going to be a team, as I warned with Rondale Moore, that is going to be rotating between the 3 receivers quite often, and Hopkins might be the best consistent option, but then after that, it's going to be a dart throw. Adam Thielen, another guy to consider selling high on as well. He's also very much like Chase, had quite a few touchdowns relative to the receptions, and this looks to be more of a Justin Jefferson-based offense in terms of his reliability. Thielen is somebody to consider selling high on. Sell high tight ends. The one I would try to sell high on is Mike Gesicki. Mike Gesicki had a great week 3. I believe he was the number 3 tight end. I have to double check that real quick for this week. But remember, he put up a 0 in week 1. So he was actually the number 2. But basically what I would try to do is try to see what you can get for Mike Gesicki. He is a guy that if you try to sell him, I think you might be able to get some better consistent value. We don't know exactly what Miami's offense is going to look like from week to week because Gesicki has had some games where he's targeted, but other times he's not. What's Tua's health going to look like, etc. So I'd personally try to sell him. Defenses to sell. So I would try to sell Denver personally. Denver is the number 2 defense right now, but they've also played the Giants, the Jets, and the Jaguars over the first 3 weeks. Next week they get the Ravens. So try to see what kind of value you can get because they played some pretty easy opponents so far. Might not be able to replicate that value going forward. And then kickers, try to see if you can sell Justin Tucker. If you can get any kind of flex player for Justin Tucker, I would do that, especially coming off that kick, which I've bashed Justin Tucker a lot, but that was impressive. I bash him as a fantasy football player, not an actual football player. He's probably the best kicker of all time. But try to see if you can get some better value for him for your fantasy football lineup. Running a little low on time here, but we will talk waivers next. And waivers, a couple guys I want to talk about. Running backs and wide receivers are the big one, but for quarterbacks, the ones that I like are Taylor Heineke for Washington. He's got a good matchup against Atlanta. He actually played pretty well last week against Buffalo, even though they're a very good pass defense, and I think that he will expand the offense more than we've seen in that game. I like him as a stream option. Jimmy Garoppolo I like as well. They're going to probably be in a competitive game against Seattle where there's going to be a lot of passing back and forth. Garoppolo, another player who's, in my opinion, is underrated. Good stream option for this week. A trick stream to me is Jameis Winston. And much like I talked about with receiver touchdown regression expected, Jameis Winston has been very much the quarterback equivalent of that. Because week 1, he went off because he had 5 touchdowns and 150 yards. Against New England, well, then he had that game against Carolina, which was awful. But then against New England, he did have a better performance. But he also only, I believe, threw for about 125 yards in that game and had 2 touchdowns, no picks. So he gets the Giants next week, which is not a great defense, but they're also not a terrible defense. So I don't personally trust Jameis Winston enough as somebody that I could stream that week to justify the limited amount of yards that he's generally thrown for so far this season. Ben Roethlisberger, similar as well. He's got the Packers, but if all of his weapons are injured and he's not the athlete he used to be, I'm a little concerned about how he's going to be able to control the offense. If he couldn't do it against the Bengals, it's going to be hard to do it against the Packers. Running backs. The number one running back to add, if he is not already taken by somebody, is Chuba Hubbard. There is no questions asked. This guy should be the guy that you're trying to pick up. There are multiple players that I would consider dropping for him, including ones I'll talk about in a sec. But Chuba Hubbard, we don't know how long Christian McCaffrey is going to be out. If he is on your waivers, that is your number one priority, no questions asked. But yeah, another guy to consider on that same team, though, even though maybe a very late pickup that I wouldn't spend fab on or anything like that, is Royce Freeman. There's an chance that he could get some of the workload from Hubbard, but it's probably going to be Hubbard getting the majority of it. Other guys as well, and these are guys that I like more as players that you can flip, and it's Peyton Barber and Giovanni Bernard. I think those are great ads because Peyton Barber, because of the volume that he's going to get until Josh Jacobs is back. Giovanni Bernard, because of his value that he demonstrated Sunday with the Bucs when they are behind. But if you can acquire these players off waivers and then coming off of good weeks, try to flip them for somebody that's going to be more consistent, I would try to do that. So Peyton Barber, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but if, let's say Peyton Barber coming off that great week and then Tyson Williams coming off a bad week, somebody is more high on Peyton Barber than they are Tyson Williams, you might be able to acquire Tyson Williams for him, and I would definitely do that. That is a good trade for you. You can get Williams off a bad game compared to Peyton Barber off a game where he played well, but he's probably not going to be starting the whole season. Other guys that I like as stashes. So A.J. Dillon and Tony Jones. So we just saw the injury situation with Hubbard and Madison. Madison, I'm pretty sure, is picked up in every league, but if he is available too, then that's another guy right up there with Hubbard that you should try to get. But with Jones and Dillon, these are guys that I would stash just to hold in case there is an injury. We saw the number 1 and number 2 running backs that were generally drafted this season go down with injuries. We saw that last year as well. Stash these guys that are clear handcuffs because they could be huge value to you if somebody gets injured. Brandon Bolden is interesting too because with James White injury, he could assume the pass catching responsibilities on the Patriots. And then a trick to me is Kyle Juszczyk. He put up a pretty good game for San Francisco, but this backfield is just an absolute mess. I don't think it's worth picking up Kyle Juszczyk. He's more of a trick play, blocking type player anyway, who got good opportunity here, but it's not going to last all season. Wide receivers to pick up on waivers. The one I like the most is Hunter Renfrow. I've talked about him a little bit in previous weeks, but a great PPR option, very consistent for Vegas. He got a touchdown last week as well. I think he's a guy that is somebody that is almost developing similarly the way we view Cole Beasley, Jacoby Myers, people like that are just basically security blanket slot guys that the quarterback can go to, and that seems to be what Derek Carr is doing with him. I like Hunter Renfrow as somebody you can pick up on waivers and hold on your roster and possibly even throw it in flex at times and give you some good value. Good safe play if you're just trying to play it safe for that week and you're favored. Other guys to pick up, Emmanuel Sanders. I don't like him as much because I think that in certain games he's not going to get the volume like he did in this one. But he's definitely interesting considering that offense. Jacoby Myers, I talked about him. If he's out there for some reason, pick him up. Tim Patrick, similar to Renfrow and Myers, actually, Tim Patrick got very involved with the Broncos, who weren't really throwing the ball a lot. They're going to get Baltimore next week. I think that he could be some sneaky value for you to pick up on waivers. And then another guy that I like, Zacchaeus from Atlanta. If Russell Gage is still out and they have Washington next week, this is another good sneaky option to pick up on waivers who could produce some good value for you. Tricks out there, Marquez Callaway. He had a good game last week. He also had 2 terrible games first 2 weeks. Khalif Raymond, I don't think that is a replicable performance that he had for the Lions. If you want to check out more of my video yesterday where I talk about him, Deshaun Jackson is past his prime. Do not pick him up. I just don't think that he's going to have games like that again. And then Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is somebody that I think could have some value, but I just don't think there's going to be consistent enough volume for you to continue to go to him. Tight ends. So Tyler Conklin probably already picked up, but if he's out there, definitely grab him. One I want to talk about in more depth is Gerald Everett. Tyler Lockett had an injury. It looks like it's not as bad as we thought, but Gerald Everett, 5 for 54 on 5 targets. Probably the number 2 pass catcher if we have continued injuries if Lockett is out. I think that going to be a good option for you if you're hurting on tight end. Gerald Everett could be somebody that you can pick up on waivers and give you some good value. Pat Freiermuth is interesting to me because if the Steelers have all 3 of their receivers injured, they could use Freiermuth quite a bit, but he hasn't really shown the sample size, so that's very much a gamble. Dawson Knox is kind of more of a trick to me because he's had 2 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks, so he might be grabbed more often, but I just don't see that volume replicating all season. Defenses. So Tennessee, good defense because they've got the Jets in week 4, so that's pretty much all I have to say about that. That should be a good green light for you to play them. Cincinnati has Jacksonville, which is also very much a similar situation, but Trevor Lawrence has been turnover prone. Cincinnati's a solid play too. As well as a trick though is the Chargers. They've had some good performances, especially against Kansas City with all the turnovers. But I think Vegas is generally, where they play on Monday night next week, is more conservative and runs an efficient offense. I could see Chargers struggling next week. Kicker streams. Greg Joseph is a decent option to me for Minnesota. He gets Cleveland. I could see Minnesota getting to the red zone quite a bit, but not converting and thus settling for field goals. Good option to consider there. McPherson for Cincinnati is another player to consider on Thursday night, but you are having to play him early if you do that. And then if you want a late add, Vizcaino from the Chargers, who's going to play on Monday night. So if you pick him up and you're winning that week and you're favored and you're up by 30 points, just drop Vizcaino. And then what you can do is pick up Larry Roundtree or a backup running back to Eckler, who's probably going to have more value to you potentially if there's any injuries during that game than holding the kicker when you've already secured that week. That's a trick I talked about in my video that I made last week for kickers, so check that out if you're interested. Drop candidates. I'm going to cover this real quick before we close this video. I would drop Mac Jones. He hasn't really been all that productive for you. I don't think it's worth holding on to him, especially since he's got Tampa Bay next week. Carson Wentz I would also drop. I think Carson Wentz, the way he's playing right now, he might not even have a job next season. And then Zach Wilson, you pretty much just have to drop him. Running back James White, unfortunate injury. Good fantasy player when healthy, but it looks like he's out all season. I would drop him. Carlos Hyde you can safely drop as well. James Robinson has pretty much shown that he's the lead back there. Hyde has very minimal value, if any. Houston running backs, as I already mentioned last week, don't own any of them. They're just not worth it at all. Wide receivers that you can drop. Nelson Aguilar for the Patriots. There's quite a few Patriots in this drop list, but also because their offense is very ineffective right now. KJ Osborne, I would drop him too. He had some value promise, but I think that was more just based on the game script, and when they're ahead, he's not going to get as involved. And maybe surprising, but I would drop Laviska Shenault. Has been disappointing this season, has clearly fallen behind the pecking order of several other receivers on that team. I would drop Shenault. Somebody worth monitoring because of his talent, but I don't think you need to roster him right now. Tight ends, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith. I had high hopes for Hunter Henry this offseason, but just didn't work out, unfortunately. But I would drop those guys. I don't think it's necessarily worth holding on to them. And then defenses I would drop. So Pittsburgh, they've got a lot of injuries right now. They did not play well against Cincinnati, and then they've got Green Bay next week. If you need to drop a defense, I would definitely drop Pittsburgh if you can. So that's all I got for this video, or excuse me, this video's buy low, sell high, waivers, and drops. So if you're interested in more videos like this, please check out my channel. Comment below if you have any questions for week 4. And I will answer your videos in my Saturday start sit video. If you check out my previous videos on the channel where I have the buy low, sell high, I answer everybody's questions who comments. I don't have a ton of subscribers right now, and I want to try to help everybody that comments. So if you comment, I will get back to you. Please take advantage of this if you're interested. And that's what this is all about. My ideas, my recommendations, you don't have to go with, but it's just a sounding board of what I would do, and I hope it can be helpful to just share opinions, get some perspective, so that you can put your best lineup together for week 4. So thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.